Before anyone on deck can raise the alarm, the captain is already down, the mate is awake, and the man who should have been steering the night watch is inside the cabin. This is a maritime mystery, but not the kind that ends in a clean verdict. It is the story of the Nantucket whaleship Globe, and of what happened in January of 1824, first in a wooden cabin at sea, and later on a low coral atoll called Mili. Hold the shape of it in mind from the start. The first murders made confessions. The second violence left only witnesses who did not understand the society around them. The record begins plainly: a Nantucket whaleship, 21 men, a captain from Martha's Vineyard, and a voyage meant to turn sperm oil into money. In December of 1822, the Globe sails out as part of an ordinary trade. There is nothing exotic in that sentence. A ship, an owner, a master, a crew, and a market waiting an ocean away. The Globe belonged to Nantucket owners and was commanded by Thomas Worth. Lay and Hussey, two of the men who lived through what followed and published an account 4 years later, remembered the voyage this way: the dates and names are useful, but the voice is not neutral. Still, the bones of it are ordinary. Nothing in that list says mutiny. That is why the list matters. The Globe that left Massachusetts was an ordinary instrument of an ordinary trade. And ordinary instruments are not supposed to come apart in the night. But the crew did not stay the crew that signed on. At Oahu in the Hawaiian Islands, 6 men ran and 1 was discharged. The Globe did what whalers often did in the Pacific. She patched the crew and sailed on. New hands came aboard, strangers to the ship and to each other, bound by a contract and a course rather than by anything earned together at sea. A whaling voyage could last years, and trust aboard was built slowly, watch by watch, in shared work and shared danger. That kind of trust cannot be shipped at a port like fresh water and salt pork. The ship that left Hawaii was not socially the same ship that had left Massachusetts. She had the same name, the same hull, the same captain. She did not have the same crew, and she did not have the same trust. And here is where the real danger lived. The fatal assumption was not that every man aboard was loyal. No whaling master believed that. Loyalty was never the expectation. The expectation was control. The assumption was thinner and more dangerous. That a ship could absorb desertion, punishment, new hands, and resentment, then keep its hierarchy intact because the sea left no alternative.
Quickly now.
The logic ran something like this. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to appeal. No magistrate, no court, no town within 1,000 miles of open water. And so the order would hold, because what other choice did any man have? That belief held the ship together right up until the night it didn't. A hierarchy that survives only because escape is impossible is not strong. It is merely sealed, and a sealed pressure has only one direction to go. By January of 1824, the Globe was far from the ports that could discipline her, and far from the families that could recognize the boys aboard her. And some of the crew were very young, boys more than men, a long way from anyone who knew their faces. The same distance that protected the voyage from interruption also protected it from rescue. There was no one near enough to intervene, and no one near enough to help. Near Fanning Island, in the Central Pacific, the ship was still in company with another vessel, the Lyra. 2 hulls within sight of one another on an enormous ocean. But company at sea is not the same thing as rescue. 2 ships can sail within view and share nothing that matters when the night finally turns. A sail on the horizon is not a hand on your shoulder. There is something we can fix to the day before that night, because one man later swore to it under oath. Gilbert Smith, in his deposition, puts one ugly fact on the very day of the mutiny. A crewman named Joseph Thomas was whipped in view of the crew. A flogging witnessed on the open deck, with every hand made to see it. It is tempting to make that single act the cause of everything that followed, to draw a straight line from the lash to the killings. That line is too clean. A whipping does not explain the murders by itself. Punishment at sea was common, and most floggings did not end in dead officers. What the whipping tells us is narrower and more useful than a simple cause. It tells us the air aboard the Globe was already charged before Samuel Comstock took the watch. The flogging did not light the fire. It shows us the fire was already laid, and it seems at least one man sensed what was coming. One of the youngest aboard, William Lay, later said he tried to get word aft toward the officers in the stern and failed. Even if that memory is exact, it proves something narrower than innocence or guilt. It does not make him a hero, and it does not condemn him. What it proves is this: the ship's social order had become a place where fear could move faster than warning. A boy who suspects something terrible and cannot make himself heard by the men who could stop it is not a footnote to the story. He is a measurement. He tells us how far the ship had already drifted from a working chain of command, where word from below reaches the men above in time to matter. That memory deserves careful handling, though. It reaches us through Lay and his fellow survivor Hussey, and later through the naval officer Paulding, years after the events themselves. The dates and names survive. The neutral voice does not. At 10 o'clock at night, Smith went below and Comstock took the watch. Comstock was 21 years old and held the rank of boat steerer, the man responsible for the first iron thrown at a whale, a position with real authority over the men in his boat and real proximity to the officers above him. In the deposition, that handoff is calm, almost clerical. One man relieves another. It is the most routine event on any vessel that has ever crossed an ocean, repeated thousands of times on a single voyage without a thought. A watch change is supposed to preserve order. It is the small, invisible machinery of trust that lets the sleeping men below trust the waking men above to keep the ship safe. On the globe that night, that same machinery hid the moment order ended. The form was kept perfectly. The substance was already gone. What happened next? The deposition records without performance. And it does not need theatrical language. It has the date, the night of Sunday, the 26th of January, 1824. It has the officers' names, the captain, Worth, and the mates, Beadle, Lumbert, and Fisher. It has the watch, and it has the oath sworn afterward at a consulate far across the ocean. That is enough, and more than most mysteries from that era can offer. Strip away every later retelling, every dramatization, every villain a storyteller has tried to build, and you are left with a plain and terrible fact. The men who died in the cabin were not symbols of command in that moment. They were not the abstract authority a mutiny is supposed to be against. They were sleeping men in a wooden room with no court yet built around them. There was no trial aboard the Globe. There was only the act in the dark, and then far away and much later, the testimony. And the killing did not solve anything for the men who did it. The murder of officers did not create a new order. There was no government waiting to be claimed, no clean authority that passed from a dead captain to a living one like an inheritance. What the violence created instead was a ship full of men who now had to decide what kind of criminals, witnesses, prisoners, or followers they had become. Some had done the killing, some had only watched, some had wanted no part of any of it and were aboard all the same, with nowhere on a small ship to stand apart. That question, the question of who each man now was, did not stay at the scene of the crime. It followed them. It followed them across the water, all the way to Mili. Here the story reaches the turn this episode was built around. Mili enters the American record as a place where the mutiny arrived. That phrasing sounds neutral. It is not. Mili had its own chiefs, its own rivalries, its own debts and rules, most of which the surviving record does not let us hear directly or even indirectly. A damaged ship carrying frightened and dangerous strangers came up over its horizon in early February of 1824. The Atoll did not lack a story. It lacked in the archive a voice. And the man at the center of the mutiny does not stay at the center for long. Comstock does not survive long enough to explain Mili. That matters far more than it first appears. The retellings love to keep him in the frame, the charismatic ringleader, the cold engine of the whole disaster, the single mind from which all the horror flows. But he died early in the shore phase, killed by other men from his own ship, before most of what happened on Mili had happened at all. If the episode keeps him at the center after his own death, it repeats the oldest mistake in this kind of story. It treats the island as a backdrop for one American mind, even when that mind is gone. Whatever unfolded on Mili after Comstock died, unfolded in a world he was no longer part of, shaped by people and pressures the American sources can barely register, let alone explain. Now, the reason one half of this story has so much paper and the other half has almost none. When 6 men cut the globe free and carried her to Valparaiso on the coast of Chile, they carried more than a ship. They carried names, a sequence, a date, and a survivor's burning need to be believed and to be cleared. June of 1824, the U.S. Consul takes possession of the ship and examines the men. The machinery of record closes around them. No one escaped the second violence with anything an American court would ever read. So consider what Smith's deposition actually is, as an object. It is a survival machine. It turns a mutiny into questions and answers, names and dates, guilt placed at a careful distance. Every line of it does quiet work for the man who swore it. It positions him away from the killing. It fixes the blame on others. It makes him legible and useful to authority, a witness rather than a suspect. None of that means he lied. It means the document has a purpose, and it should be read with that purpose in view. There are retellings that take this same sworn material and rebuild it into the saga of one monstrous young man, a villain with a master plan and an iron will. The whole disaster reduced to his character. The deposition does not support that weight. There are versions of this story, and then there is the limit of the source. Smith's testimony can tell us who relieved the watch and when. It cannot tell us what Mili thought had arrived in its lagoon. The other great source is the rescue, and it too comes to us shaped by a single point of view, this time a naval one. 1825, the Navy directs the Dolphin to search for whatever remained of the globe's people. Paulding, writing 7 years after the mutiny, after serving aboard that search vessel, gives the rescue the shape of naval danger, an armed landing, a warning not to come ashore unprepared, suspicion, extraction under threat. He writes in the deliberate language of a United States naval officer, the scene is evidence, and it is also a frame. That scene is genuinely valuable. 2 men were found alive, William Lay and Cyrus Hussey, both of them young, both survivors now of 2 separate violences rather than one. But the scene is also exactly where the language of rescue begins to cover over the language of encounter. A rescue needs a hero and a danger. It sorts the world into the saved and the threat. An encounter is something else. An encounter is 2 societies, each reading the other badly. Across a gap neither one can cross. The first story is far easier to tell. It is not always the truer one, and then the record does something that deserves to be named plainly. After this point, it does not go silent because nothing more happened. It goes silent because the people who could explain one whole side of it did not leave behind the kind of document an American archive was built to keep. There is the gap at the heart of this episode, not the missing hours of the mutiny itself, which can be reconstructed almost hour by hour from sworn testimony and named men. The true absence is the missing account of the shore, where an entire society's understanding of what had happened in its own waters simply never entered the file and was never sought for it. This is the gap the episode has to sit with. Without filling it, the silence is not empty. It is unrecorded, which is a different and harder thing. It would be easy to fill that silence anyway. The easy version is ready and waiting. It says the mutineers were killed by islanders, and then the Navy arrived and rescued the only 2 men left alive. 3 clean beats. A crime, a punishment, a rescue in tidy sequence. And that version is not false. The men did die. The 2 survivors were taken off. The Navy did come for them. But it is incomplete in the way official records so often become incomplete, by making one society fully legible, with names and motives, and the other one mere scenery. In that telling, the Americans have faces, depositions, and an arc with a beginning and an end. Mili has a coastline and a thread in the trees. One side is a cast of people. The other side is treated as weather, as terrain, as something that simply happens to the people who matter. My read is that Mili cannot be treated as the mutiny's epilogue. The shipboard violence had officers, watches, sworn statements, and a consul standing behind it. It had a structure that can be named and followed. The shore violence had chiefs, fear, debt, disease, power, and misunderstanding behind it. and not one surviving Mili witness anywhere in the file. Modern historian Thomas Farrell Heffernan summarizes that bad relations on Mili, mainly the abusive treatment by one of the mutineers, a man named Payne, led to the killing of the remaining seamen, all except Lay and Hussey. Read that summary slowly. The cause that reaches us, even through American and modern hands, is social. It is treatment, relations, abuse, the slow poison of how armed strangers behaved among people who owed them nothing and whom they did not try to understand. That is not a naval event with a clear chain of command. That is a society reaching the end of what it would tolerate. The only surviving explanation here comes through Lay and Hussey, 4 years after the mutiny, with no matching Mili account preserved beside it. So what can honestly be said and what cannot?
This is the past.
A cautious reading can say that the Americans were not simply innocent observers caught in someone else's savagery, and that the islanders were not simply a sudden danger waiting in the trees. Both of those are framings the record quietly invites, and neither is a framing the evidence actually earns. But a cautious reading cannot give Mili the courtroom voice the record denied it from the start. No open Marshallese source from 1824 speaks here. No first-person Mili account of these events was located, and inventing one to balance the page would only repeat the original erasure in a kinder costume. The absence can be described. It cannot be spoken into without manufacturing the very thing that is missing. So I will not hand you a verdict. The open question is not whether violence happened on Mili. It is what kind of violence the American record was never built to hear. The ship gave us confessions. The island left a harder silence.